Absolutely, yes. Oh, we're live.
I do like a cup of tea, but yeah, I end up drinking too much tea and then. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. We're just discussing tea. If anyone has any comments about tea, we are. For anyone who doesn't know, my name is Claire. I'm from Listening Books, the audiobook charity, and this is Sheila Bugler, who is a brilliant author. So welcome to you, Sheila. Thank you very much for joining us for this Virtual Village Hall live author interview. So we're going to be discussing her book, I Could Be You. But before we do that, I just want to know how you all are. Have you joined us from anywhere in particular? How's the weather? Have you had a cup of tea yet today? Feel free to post in the comments.
Yes, we'd love to hear any comments.
For those of you who are new, feel free to pop your questions, your comments for Sheila in the chat box. I will keep an eye on that throughout the interview and forward those questions to Sheila for you. And then I've got a few questions of my own, which I'll slip in there as well.
And I love answering questions. So as random as you want, I'm fine with that.
I think who we got? Oh, Peterborough cup of tea. Fabulous. Thank you, Coco. I'm starting to slightly worry about this storm that's coming that keeps being on the news. It's starting to rain.
Know. And I'm training for the London Marathon at the moment, and I'm meant to be doing my long run tomorrow. So I'm slightly dreading doing it in a storm. It's going to be horrible.
That's some dedicated running.
Yeah, it will be my first and only marathon, I can tell you. It won't be happening.
You don't want to do it again?
No.
Coco says we never have any exciting weather announcements.
Where does Coco live if there's no exciting weather announcements?
That's Peterborough.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. You have some weather, I'm sure, in Peterborough. Oh, brilliant. Right. Well, I'm going to jump in with a couple of questions to get us started while you're all joining in the chat there. So I Could Be You. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm not sure entirely what I was expecting from it, but I really, really enjoyed it to the point where I was kind of sneaking in corners and carrying on reading it. Kind of, what was the idea behind that? Because is it the first book in the Dee Doran series?
Yes, so it's the fourth book I've written, and it's the first book in my Dee Doran series. So a few things behind it. Let me think. So first of all, the location's really important because it's set in Eastbourne, and I had quite recently moved to Eastbourne when I started writing the book. So I wanted to write a book set in Eastbourne because I really love Eastbourne. And one of the reasons I love Eastbourne, I love seaside towns generally, and I wanted to write a book about a woman sort of living on the edge of England, which is often how we describe Eastbourne here. We talk about it being the edge of England. A woman sort of living in a remote-ish seaside location, alone by herself, and sort of she's kind of on the edge of her life as well. I wanted to write about a woman who'd kind of reached a point in her life where she felt lost and she didn't know what to do. And also, really importantly to me, I wanted my central character to be a woman in her 50s. I didn't want to write about some spry young thing in her 20s. I wanted to write about a woman about my own age, and that experience of being a woman in your 50s, being single, having had a career and suddenly that career is over and not being sure what you want to do with the rest of your life. So they're all themes I wanted to explore in the book. And that was the starting point. That was Dee. I knew from very early on I wanted Dee to be a journalist. I didn't want to write a book with a detective as my main character because I'd done that with my previous series. And I'm a little bit lazy when it comes to research. And if you're writing a police procedural, you have to kind of do a lot of research to get that right. So it just seemed easier not to do that. And so they were all the starting points, really. And then I had a few chats with my agent, and we spoke about the idea of writing a book around the theme of sort of mixed identity, and then so that was the starting point, really. And also the opening scene in the book, that idea of a woman found dead with a buggy beside her and the baby missing, that was an idea I'd had for a long time. So I was really keen to write a book with that as the opening scene. So they're all the starting points for the book.
Yeah, you did really get a love how much you liked Eastbourne, even though obviously there's this event going on, but just the descriptions of it and the weather at the time that it's set, and it was it made me want to visit Eastbourne, really.
Eastbourne really is, it's such an interesting place because it's midway between Brighton and Hastings, which are both very kind of cool and trendy towns. And Eastbourne has this reputation as being God's waiting room. It's where people move to when they've retired. And when I moved to Eastbourne, I knew almost nothing about it. And it really is. It's a lovely town. It's got stunning coast. It's got amazing countryside. We're on we're at the beginning of the South Downs National Park. And so I just wanted to kind of celebrate the beauty of the place in the book as well.
I also love that Dee, as you say, wasn't in her 20s or 30s. She's had a career. She's had almost a separate life in some respects to where she is now.
Yeah, I think that's something that we don't see a lot in crime fiction. So generally in crime fiction, we see if there's a central character is a woman, she's normally in her late 20s, early 30s. That's generally, I'm generalizing, but that is a very common age for a female character to be in a crime novel. If they're a man, they're usually slightly older, but that's allowed if you're a man, right? There's very few, it is slightly changing, but when I wrote that book, there were almost no books with a central female character in her 50s, and especially a central female character who isn't just the kind of stereotype of a happily married mummy who's at home looking after the children while her husband goes to work. Dee is, she's very messed up, she drinks too much, she has several not very sensible relationships with men, and I think single women in their 50s, there's a lot of them are still looking for love, and they're not perfect. They're still learning about life and learning about themselves. And I also really liked the idea that she'd had this big career and that was over, and she didn't know who she was or what to do with the rest of her life. And I think that's a decision that faces a significant amount of people in their 50s, and it's not explored a lot, particularly in crime fiction, and particularly when the character is a woman.
Absolutely. I going back to what you're saying about having to do research for detective, I thought it was refreshing. She was a journalist, so she has that kind of investigative background, and she knows how to get into stories and things, but she's not necessarily directly involved with the detection of it.
Well, no, and that gives you a lot of freedom as a writer, you see, because she can kind of do her own thing. She's not, she doesn't have to do it within the boundaries of police procedures. She can just kind of go and be her own agent. So it's much more fun as a writer in a way, because she can do things that a police detective probably wouldn't be able to do.
Absolutely. And she's not solely unconnected with it, that, that she's not a builder or
no,
and or an old lady in a village.
exactly, and so in a way, and I never meant for this to be the start of a series, but that's what it became. And in a way, partly that is because through investigating this one crime, Dee sort of finds herself again and finds her in terms of career, the next stage of what she's going to do after this, and that you see that unfold in the next few books.
So the point of view of the characters bounces back and forth between each chapter, which I really liked, although it took me a little while to get used to that. How difficult is that to write? Being in different.
For me, it's not difficult, and every writer is different. And the reason it's not difficult, I don't say that sort of in a big-headed way at all. It's just that what I find difficult is writing just from one character's point of view. And there are a few reasons for that. One is confidence, I think, which it's taken me a long time to believe that I can write a book from one character's point of view and keep that story compelling enough from one character's point of view. But the other thing is that for me, there are so many characters I want to explore in a novel. I want to write from the point of view of other characters, because that's, for me, that's kind of part of the story. And particularly in this book, writing from Katie's perspective, that felt really central to the book and to the story.
Yeah, I thought it worked really, really well. Because I think you've got to, as you say, you've got a better understanding of their motives and why they're doing certain things.
And it's fun as well, because you're writing with two different voices. I don't find shifting between the different voices difficult at all. I find that quite easy. And it probably makes it just a bit easier to write the book as well, because moving between different characters' point of view all the time, it does help move the story forward. And I think for me, that is harder to do when you're keeping in the viewpoint of one character. I've done it with my last few books, but I think it is slightly harder, more challenging.
Yeah. Coco says, an old lady in a village throwing shade at the TMC there. I'll be the little old lady in the village, probably.
I'm rapidly getting
I love them. I love them. I also love the start of this book because it really jumps into the action. There's no kind of preamble of
no.
But there's a lot leading up to this point, which gets revealed as you go through the novel. Did you have to effectively work backwards, or did you start at the murder and then work from there?
So let me think, how did I do that? Generally, how I write my books is chronologically. So I start from the chapter 1 and I work through. What I do have to do, say with a book like this, is I do have to have a timeline that I write out and I keep referring to, because this book doesn't just shift between points of view, it shifts from present to past as well. And that's quite tricky to make all that work and make it align. And the other thing that's really tricky about that is because when you're writing a crime novel, obviously you have chapters that have big reveals in them throughout the book, and trying to make sure that the big reveals in the present are lining up with what I'm telling the reader about the past story. That's quite challenging to pull all of that together. Actually, challenging is an understatement. It's really painful and it's really difficult.
Is it so with the different points of view? You effectively almost writing two books at the same time, and then kind of marrying them together?
I have writer friends who literally write the two different points of view as two separate documents. I don't do that at the beginning. So what I do, like I said, is I write my chapters. I go chapter 1, chapter 2, etc., and I jump between the two points of view. But I'll do that in my first draft. But then, because of that issue of making sure that everything lines up and there's no obvious errors, what I then do is I'll take out all of the D chapters, for example, and I'll go through them chronologically, just make sure that they make sense as a whole, and the same for the other characters' points of view, and then see how it all fits together. It takes a good few drafts to get there.
Yeah, I can imagine it would take a lot of time. So Coco says, I do love reading from different characters' point of view. It's really interesting seeing the story start to piece together. And it's also fun knowing everyone's secrets. It is. There's lots of secrets in this.
Yes, there are lots of secrets. But then, Coco, what I would say is, okay, the secrets are big in this book. But one of the things I really like exploring as a writer is how everyone has secrets. And all of us show a certain side of ourselves to different people. So the person you're seeing today is nice Sheila, but it's not the Sheila who's home with my husband and is really grumpy because he hasn't emptied the washing machine, for example. We show different sides of ourselves. And also the other thing that I'm really interested about is that if people have big secrets, how does that kind of affects how you live your life and the relationships you have with people? So all of that I just find really interesting as a writer to explore all of that. And I think you see that in this book, particularly with the Ella character, how having a big secret has really impacted her whole life, really.
Yeah, it really has. We have a question from Paz, and they say, do you have any ideas? Do you have ideas as you go, or is it all planned before you start to write?
Hello, Paz. That's a great question, and it's one that writers are asked a lot. And for me, I have an idea of I'll have a central idea, which often is just the image. So, for example, with I Could Be You, the central image was a woman, a dead woman is found in a street or in a road, and there's a buggy, a child's buggy beside her, but the baby is gone. So that was the central idea. For some writers, they'll have that central idea. They will then sit down and they will plot out a novel from start to finish before they write it. And I would love to be a writer like that, but unfortunately I'm not. I find the only way I can write my story is to write it and see what happens. And I don't think it's the most effective way to write a book, but I have tried to be a plotter and plot everything first, and that just doesn't work for me. So often I will literally sit down to write and I won't know what the next sentence is going to be. That's how much I'm winging it when I write my first draft. And eventually when I've got the basis of the story written out, then I'll start to kind of I'll start to think more about the plot and what works in my first draft and what doesn't work. But often, and some writers like this puts fear in their hearts, often when I'm working in a book, it's not until the very last draft that I'll know how it all comes together. So that's a kind of scary way. It keeps me interested, I guess, but it's also a scary way to do it.
That kind of led me to the question, because I had quite a few, what's going on moments when I'm reading the book. Do you get surprised by where it takes you?
Amy, yes. Yeah, God, I get completely surprised. Yeah, and I think for me, that's one of the reasons I love it. And actually, I think what happens a lot is that I write and I throw in lots of cliffhangers and lots of twists as I'm writing. And then there's a really long period where I think about every twist and I love it, but I have to think about, can I make this work in terms of the story? If I can, brilliant, it stays in. But there are a few twists that I just have to let go because they just don't work. They're great as the end of a chapter, but they don't work within the context of the novel.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm always surprised.
Yeah. So Amy was asking, have you ever written most of a book and then just decided it didn't work, or do you always make it work?
No, well. Yes, Amy. So often I'll write about 50,000 words, which is more or less half a book, and then decide it doesn't work and I have to completely rework it. And that is really, it's really painful. But sometimes that's just what you have to do because, like I said, I have to write my way into the story. Luckily, I'm a very fast touch typist. Otherwise, none of this would be happening at all. But yeah, and Amy, sometimes it just doesn't work. And sometimes it can take a long time for you to accept that if you've put a lot of work into it. And actually, that's why where an editor comes in really key to the process, because when I wrote my very second book, I kind of knew the book didn't work. But I had a deadline, I had to send it to the publisher, and I kind of knew the book didn't work. I wasn't happy with it. And I had an editor at the time who basically came back and said, this isn't working. And even though that's a hard message to get at that stage, I was really relieved that she had said that, because it kind of, it meant I had to rewrite the book in a very short time scale, but it meant I had a much better book at the end of it.
Yeah, I imagine that would be hard, but yeah, if you come out with something better at the end. Paz says, I love that. It sounds more of a fun and exciting way to write.
It's also more terrifying, by the way, Paz.
So we have a question from Jenny. She says, hello, I was wondering how long you've been writing for and what led you into or inspired you to become an author.
Hi, Jenny. I love this question. Okay, so I have been writing. I can tell you how long I've been writing because I started writing when my daughter was born, and she's now 18. So 18 years. Like many writers, when I was little, I wanted to be a writer, but I just didn't have the confidence to kind of ever follow that dream through. So I just did other stuff. What I did was, through my 20s and 30s, I did like so many different jobs, you wouldn't believe it. And this is quite a common thing with writers, actually. I did loads and loads and loads of different jobs, and I never found something that I'd like it for a little bit, then I'd get bored or whatever, and I'd move on to something else. I have switched careers so many times, it's ridiculous. And then I have 2 kids. So my son was 4, and when my daughter was born, I had this real light bulb moment. It was a really hot summer in London. We were walking through the park, and I just thought, this thing that I've always wanted to do, if I don't sit down and try to do it properly, one day I'll be lying on my deathbed and I'll think, why didn't I try that? And that was the starting point. And it was a really strong moment. So I went home that evening and I started writing. But the thing about that is, first of all, I was on maternity leave with two young kids. I had no idea how to write. I'd never done a writing course. I read lots. I'd always read lots, but I didn't know anything about writing. So I started writing, and for some reason, I just kept going. So I wrote lots of really, really bad stuff for ages, like terrible stuff that nobody will ever see because it was terrible. But in writing that bad stuff, I was learning how to write. And at the time, I didn't even know I wanted to write crime fiction. I was trying different stories, different things. And then I was reading a novel by Harlan Coben, and again, another light bulb moment. I was halfway through that and I just thought, oh my goodness, this is what I want to write. This is what I want to do. I think I could do this. Now, I'm not saying I'll ever be anywhere near as good as him, but that I knew then that's what I wanted to do. And that kind of helped to turn me. And from there, I started writing crime fiction. And I was very lucky because then I got accepted onto an Arts Council funded mentoring course where I had a mentor for a year who helped me write that first novel. But the thing about writing is it's really, really, really difficult and it takes forever. So that first novel never got published. I wrote a second book after that got me an agent, but again, never got published. So it was my third book, Hunting Shadows. That's the third book I wrote, but it's actually the first book that got published. And on all of that, how naive I was when I started, because that day in the park, I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go home, I'm going to write a bestseller, and I never have to go back to my day job. And that was 18 years ago, and I'm still doing the day job alongside my writing. So that's...
Well, yeah, I think you hear a lot about people I wrote a book on the train to work, and and now it's a bestseller. But you don't hear necessarily as much about the people who like graft.
and to be honest with you, I don't believe that anyone writes a train the book into bestseller. Even the people who get successful very early, they've still put a lot of graft into it, because you can't not, for a book to be good, and I'm not saying that mine are good, but even for it to be good enough for somebody to want to publish it, there's a lot of work that goes into that. And even writers who are very successful very early on in their careers, they've still worked really hard to get to that point. And some writers, they might kind of make little of it, but they have still put a lot of work in. They absolutely have.
Would you, with all the experience you have now, and knowing what works for you, would you go back and look at those earlier novels and kind of critique them or rewrite them? Or
I don't think no, I wouldn't critique them. What I have done with the earlier books is, like, they haven't been wasted, and they haven't been wasted for two reasons. First of all, I think of them as my learning to write books, and that's a really important part of becoming a writer. And secondly, even though they never got published, there's lots of bits from those books that have fed into my later books. So the opening scene in I Could Be You, that was the opening scene in the second book that never got published, and I kept that opening scene, and I always thought I'm going to get that in somewhere someday. And then the first book I ever wrote, there's loads of things about that book I still love. I can see now completely why nobody wanted to publish it, but there's still a story there, and there's images in that book that I would definitely like to have at some point in another book. So none of it's wasted,
It's just, it's learning, as you said.
It's learning, it really is. Yeah. And I'll stop in a minute for the next question. But the other thing I would say is that I think for anybody who thinks they want to become a writer to be rich and famous, that's the wrong reason to do it, and that's why those books that never got published, they're really, really important part of my journey as a writer and how I'm a writer today. So, that time isn't wasted at all, but it definitely didn't make me rich and famous.
How do you fit in? Because you said, where you're doing other things as well.
Yes.
How do you fit it all in?
Yeah, that was really difficult. So I started writing when I was on maternity leave. So then what I would do is, my son started school, and my daughter, when she was still at home with me, I would write when she was asleep during the day, which wasn't very much. And then I would fit some hours in the evening after the kids went to bed. And then when I went back to work, at that time I was working 3 days a week. And I was driven by fear. There was a lot of fear there, because I kept thinking I have to keep writing, because if I stop, I'll just give up. So what I used to do, I would get up really early. I'd get up about 4:30 in the morning on the 3 days I was working, and I would write then. And that was my writing time. And for the first few years and the first few books, that's when I wrote. because in the early days, on my days off, I was with my daughter because she was still at home with me. And then later, when both the kids were in school, at that time I was working 4 days a week. So I would, still work in the mornings. When we moved to Eastbourne, I was commuting in and out to London on the train. So that was brilliant writing time, the train time. And I'd have like a day off work when both my kids were at school. I used to write a bit at the weekends, but you can't write all weekend when you've got 2 kids and a husband who need a bit of attention, and then and now it's hard. It's still hard because I still have my day job. But there's been lots of, things around my daughter, that same daughter, she was very, very sick for a few years. So that meant I had to stop completely. And then she got better and I was able to write again. And these days, even though I work 4 days a week, I work from home. So I'm better able to kind of fit my time around the job and the writing. But it's still difficult, it's hard.
Yeah, you have to really want to do it, I would
imagine. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
But what I would say is that when I started writing properly back in the day when I was on maternity leave, it didn't take me long to realize that the thing I'd been looking for in all of these other jobs, I had found it in writing. And that was a huge sense of relief. And I honestly, for the first time ever, I thought, okay, I have found my little thing in this big, complicated world. And that's what still keeps me going, is that absolute knowledge that writing is the thing I'm meant to be doing in this life. Not, and that sounds possibly sounds a bit deluded and a bit arrogant, but that's what keeps me going, is that sense of me being most myself.
Oh, fantastic. Paz, this leads on quite well. What was the best bit of advice your mentor gave you, or you have had since you were published?
Hi, Paz. That's a really great question, actually. I think probably maybe not just advice, but advice and something else. So the advice he gave me, which was very hard advice, but is very true, is that this is a really tough business. And when you're starting out as a writer, people tell you that. But in your head, you you kind of believe it, but you still think, but it's going to be a little bit different for me, or I'm going to get there a bit quicker than other people. And that's not true. So that was really key advice. That this is a really tough business and you just need to knuckle down and accept that. And, like I said, you're not in this for fame or fortune, you're in it for the writing. But the other thing he gave me, which wasn't advice, but which was so valuable, was he gave me belief in myself as a writer. Because he really did believe in me as a writer. And at the time, as somebody who had never met any other writers, I didn't know anything about them. That was hugely valuable, because until that moment, nobody else had seen what I was writing. And you do think, am I just completely deluded? It's like and I did think about this a lot. I would think about the people who go on to X Factor or talent shows and clearly have no talent, but believe they have. And I kind of knew, so the logical part of my brain knew that my self-belief and this feeling I had, that I could be wrong about all of that. So it was lovely for somebody to kind of say, yes, you can write and you are a writer. That was huge for me.
Yeah, having someone believe in you that you can do it must be a huge boost.
And somebody who, like, I really respected as a writer. That was huge.
Yeah. So Amy asks, I know some crime authors write books in other genres, sometimes under a pseudonym. Would you ever be tempted to write in a different genre?
Amy, would I? I'm not sure is the answer. I think I don't think so is the quick answer. I think I might be tempted to write a different type of crime fiction. So I don't write thrillers, for example. I might be tempted to write a thriller one day. And if I did that, possibly a pseudonym, because writers like to identify you with a particular type of book. But no, I feel like in my sort of soul, I'm a crime writer. So I couldn't see myself going off and writing a rom-com, for example. I don't think that would happen. Never say never, but at the moment, that's how I
feel. Excuse me. Some of the characters in the book, they're quite flawed. As you get to know them, and it can be a bit hard to kind of feel sorry for them at points in the book. Did you find it easy to make them or relatable, or to make it psychologically, the actions make sense to what they have experienced?
First of all, yes, I think all the characters in the book are flawed, really. And I have definitely had feedback from some people that they don't like Dee, which I'm kind of fine with, because you know, you can't expect everyone to like everything you write anyway. But for me, you know, I just think we're all flawed to a greater or lesser degree. Now, you know, there are certain characters in the book who do terrible things, and did I struggle to make them likable? So for me, even really unlikable characters can always justify to themselves their motivation for doing something. So I think if we take Katie, who's the classic kind of villain in that book in some ways, for me, she's actually a very sympathetic character, because I think, you know, she had a very unhappy childhood, and she was quite a damaged character. And so she reacted to that in a very damaging way, in a way that was damaging to other people. But in my head, I could see the reasons why Katie acted the way she did. But I get that other people might think, oh, she's just horrible, you know. But you know, I mean, some people. So Dee's love interest, the first guy, I mean, he's just horrible. You know, I've no sympathy for him at all. But generally, and I do think about this a lot. So one thing I always think is, and I really believe this, I think that unhappy people just do behave badly sometimes because they're unhappy. And you know, you see that in life. You see people who have affairs, for example, and it's not because they're evil or nasty or they deliberately want to hurt their partner. Now, some people are, but a lot of people fall into an affair, for example. Can I just say, I've never had an affair, so I'm not saying this about myself. But some people do things like that. Generally, they're driven by unhappiness. They're driven by some sense of unhappiness. And I one of my kind of life mottos is unhappy people behave badly. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I am slightly obsessed with is the impact of childhood on the adult. And I think that, that definitely comes from me being a mother and being a mother when I started writing. But I'm really interested in exploring the effect of a bad childhood on the adult, because I think that the damage of that can be so long term, and that's something that really fascinates me.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes through in the book, particularly with Katie. You don't know so much about Shane's childhood, but there's obviously something there that has.
Well, in a way, I think with him, I just think that he was just an arrogant young man who got caught up in something. And again, you know, I don't think he had a bad childhood particularly. I think in my head, you know, he's probably a bit of a, you know, benign neglect parents who were sort of wealthy and socializing a lot. And but he was just, I think Shane's kind of fault really was just arrogance and not being the brightest tool in the toolbox, really.
Yes, yeah. I think you can kind of see how he's been manipulated, and I think sometimes you feel a little bit sorry for him in some ways as well, even though he's not the nicest.
I think the impact of his bad behavior far exceeded you know, the detrimental effect. I mean, you know, what happened to him was really terrible, actually, and actually, I don't blame him for being really angry about that later, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think as you go through the book, your feelings about each of the characters does kind of change and adapt as you learn more about them.
Yeah, and you know, there's
their
another
past
thing. Well, I think so, and there is this other thing, which is that you know, very often in life, one terrible incident can have such long lasting consequences on a person's life. You know, we see this all the time. People make one mistake and that's it. Their whole life is thrown off track. And again, I think possibly as a mother, you're always so aware of that, you know, that you have lovely kids, but they could do one, you know, they could get in a car with a drunk person. They could drive a car when they're drunk one night, or, you know, just one terrible incident because of not thinking too far ahead, because the teenage brain is incapable of that, can just literally send somebody's life so badly off track.
So Dee kind of she gets through this.
Yes.
And you know, she's making plans. Is what's next for her as a character?
Okay, so what's next for Dee, for those of you who haven't read any more in the book? And basically, and again, going back to flawed characters, she's massively flawed in this book. She's full of self-pity. She, you know, drinks too much. She's not really getting hold of what she needs to do to get her life back on track. But she does that through the book. And then through the next books in the series, she's kind of properly back on track with her life. Now, she still makes some silly mistakes because, you know, she's human and we all do that. But she gets her life back on track, and career-wise, her career kind of goes from strength to strength. She and I'm not giving anything away here. She becomes she gets quite a reputation as an investigative journalist, uncovering miscarriages of justice, and that kind of becomes her thing in the next few books.
Yeah, I really liked her as a character. I'm surprised other people.
I love her as a character, and actually, she is based on a real person, and that's quite known in Eastbourne. So, the person upon whom she's based, who is a wonderful woman, you know, her friends all know that Dee is loosely based on her as well.
Were they flattered to be a character?
No,
in
I
your
think
book?
she is flattered. She hasn't said it. I've never actually specifically said to her, "You do know I based Dee on you," but she does know, and there'll be little things. If people read the book and Dee gets a haircut, they'll say to my friend, "Oh, I see you got a haircut recently."
Is it hard to not to kind of put those things in when you've kind of slightly based it around a real person? Is it hard not to?
No, do you know what it is? It's very loosely based on her, for starters.
Yeah.
So Dee is completely Dee. She's a figment of my imagination. There's little elements of this woman's life that are a little bit based on Dee, and I for me, you know, Dee is a combination of all the feisty women I know in their 50s. You know, she's been through some stuff. She's a survivor. She's still standing. She's been battered around by life, but she's not going to let it defeat her. She's still looking for love despite everything she's been through. She's fiercely loyal. And, you know, for me, the kind of central driving force of that book is Dee's love and loyalty for this sort of lonely little family that moved next door to her. And she's also driven by a lot of regret, you know, her regret at marrying a man that wasn't the right man for her, her regret at never having had children. But again, you know, that knocks her back for a little bit, but then she plows on and she gets on with it and she stands up and she fights through. I think she's I love her. I mean, I really do love her, actually.
Yeah, I do. I think as you say, you know, she's had all these things that have gone on, but it's not let her stop going forward, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
So Kat on Facebook, she says, "Hi, love listening books. I'm dyslexic and it's given me so many more books to listen to as I had worn out the library once." Oh bless you.
Oh,
thank you, Kat.
Can I just say, first of all, let me just reply to Kat. I just want to say thank you so much, first of all, and thank you to everyone who takes out my books and listens to them. That means a huge amount. And often authors are asked if we get any money from books that are taken out in libraries or audiobooks. Yes, we do. So please keep supporting your local libraries and getting audiobooks from them, or from wherever you want to. But also, Kat, my daughter is very dyslexic, so I hear you, and she listens to a lot because she finds the words all move around and reading is very difficult for her. I also think dyslexic brain is amazing, by the way, but that's a whole other conversation.
The dyslexic brain is amazing. I'm not dyslexic, but the more I learn about it, it's very, you know, very, very amazing. I read somewhere that you run writing workshops. Is that right?
I have run writing workshops. Yeah. I have done. The only reason I'm not doing any at the moment is time. You know, work and the marathon is taking up quite a bit of time. Yes, I have. Yeah, and I love it.
Is that because you like the sharing advice or the meeting the people, or do you learn a lot from?
Okay. I love it because first of all, I love talking about writing, and it's lovely to talk about writing with aspiring writers. The thing I love about it most is that when I run a workshop, there'll always be a group of people who just don't get it. They just don't get what you're talking about. They don't get sort of some of the concepts. But then there are people who absolutely get it, and that's a joy because you see people who are who just get it, and they get the concept you're trying to get across, and that's like a real beauty because they're the writers in the group, you know, and that's lovely. I love that.
Yeah, it must be nice kind of being able to talk to other potential writers and kind of share that knowledge that you've gained from
no, it's lovely. It's lovely. But like I said, the thing for me is that it's the moment you see somebody getting something and you just think, oh, that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Paz says, have you listened to the audiobook of I Could Be You? Did you enjoy it, and were you happy with the narration and the emphasis the narrator used, etc.?
Okay, Paz, first of all, that's another great question. I haven't listened to the audiobook, and basically, I'm a writer that when my book is done, it's gone, and I don't think about it again. So that's the main reason I haven't listened to the audiobook. I do listen to audiobooks a lot, especially I said at the beginning of this, I'm training for the London Marathon, and audiobooks are literally my life as I do my long runs. So I love listening to audiobooks. Haven't listened to this one, haven't listened to the audiobooks of any of my books. And a lot of writers do have issues with the person who narrated their book. I don't. I just think it's the audiobook's job to find the right narrator for the book, and I'm really happy to trust them with that decision. Sometimes as a writer you get asked to choose between a few narrators, and when I have done that, I'm just not very good at it, to be honest. Often I'll choose somebody and everyone else will think the other person's better, so it's probably better that I don't do it. The narrators sometimes contact me, which is lovely. Some of them contact me to ask specific questions about pronunciation, or if there's anything I want them to sort of say in a particular way, which I think is really sweet and lovely.
Would you ever consider narrating it yourself, or would that not really work? It's not something you're interested in.
So I have been, I know other writers that do it. My friend Marion Todd does that. She narrates her own books. I would love to do it. I love the idea of doing it. However, I have been told it's really, really difficult. And secondly, I'm really aware that I'm not an actor. So the narrators who narrate these books, they're all trained actors. So there's two parts of that for me. One is, do I really want to take a job away from somebody who's going to do it better than me? And secondly, related to that is, I just don't think I'd be the best person, maybe. You know, I think surely an actor is going to do a better job. That's their job, you know.
Yeah. When we spoke to Marion last month, and yeah, she was saying how hard it is to read.
The thing I would say about Marion's books, though, is that because she's written that one series and her voice is so strong in those books anyway, I can see why the audiobook company really wanted her to narrate the books. That really makes sense to me. Yeah. And she has to keep going now. You couldn't switch narrators halfway through.
It would be a bit like listening. This sounds slightly different. You've written a few series. Can you tell us about it's Ellen Kelly, is it? The D.I. Ellen Kelly series?
Yeah. So I've written 10 books in total. So my first 3 books were the central character was Ellen Kelly, who's a detective, London-based detective, second generation Irish, recently widowed, and she's such a different character to Dee. She's the same in that she's a very strong woman. She's widowed. She's got 2 children. She's a bit of a moral crusader, Ellen. She has a very strong sense of justice. Very. I'm quite kind of I'm quite nuanced in terms of I would say that I see the grey in between in right and wrong. Ellen is very much black and white. She knows what's right. She knows what's wrong. And if she sees something wrong, she's got no issue with fixing that, even if it means bending the rules. I love her. The novels are based in Southeast London, around Greenwich, which is where I used to live, which is why I set them around there. 3 books in the series. There would have been more, but this is what happens in publishing. The publisher decided they didn't want to do any more crime fiction books. I'm in the process of finding a new publisher at the moment, so it might be that there are more Ellen books at some stage, but there are my Ellen books. There's also my Dee books. There's 4 books in that series, and I've also written 3 standalone novels. And actually, as a writer, if I have a choice, which I mightn't, because often publishers sort of say what they want, but my preference would be not to write any more series and to keep writing standalones, because that's what I prefer writing as a writer.
Would you, if you did have to continue, would you almost do a new series where Dee and D.I. Ellen Kelly meet? And there's
no, I'd never have them meeting.
Would it not work?
No, that makes me feel slightly ill. That's like they're such different worlds.
They are. Sorry, carry on.
Sorry. And I was going to say, it would be really interesting to go back and revisit Ellen all this time later, because, you know, I think the last Ellen book came out in something like 2016, so that's a long time ago.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I suppose, and you'd come to it with a very different experience to it, because it has been quite a while. So it would be an
Completely.
interesting one to return to, definitely. Jenny says, if any of your books were to become a film or TV series, which actors would you visualize playing the strong lead roles?
So do you know the actor? Is her name Amanda Redmond? Redford? Oh, what's her
Redmond.
name?
Amanda Redmond.
Is it Redmond? Yeah,
Yes.
she was
Yeah,
in
yeah.
New Tricks anyway. I always see her as Ellen. No, not as Ellen, as Dee. I see her as Dee. Even though
Oh,
she's,
yes, I can see that. That would work.
yeah,
Yeah.
I could see her as Dee completely. Ellen, I'm not so sure actually. I'd have to think about that. And Ed in um, my D books, who would be Ed? Somebody lovely and a little bit, somebody like John
Gosh.
Thaw, if he was still alive, I think would be a nice Ed.
Oh, yeah, no, he would
I
work
love
as
Ed, by the way. I just
Yeah.
want to say that. Oh, and also, of course, because you haven't read the other books, but Ed becomes a character.
Oh, good. I like Ed.
So Jennifer answers your question, Jenny. It's so hard to think. I loved Ed.
It
I
is
loved
really
writing him.
hard. And I think they would bring their own interpretation to it a bit as well. So
yeah. And also, basically, Jenny, the bottom line is I wouldn't care. Like, if anybody ever wanted to turn any of the books into a TV series, I'd be delighted.
I think particularly this book would make a really good, even just a standalone drama.
Well, do you
Really,
know what
really
was
good.
really not upsetting? That's way too strong a word. But about 2 years ago, I think it was ITV had a TV series. I think it was called Flesh and Blood. But basically, it was based in exactly the same stretch of beach where Dee lives, and they had all of that beautiful, shots of that whole area, and it was all set in Eastbourne. They didn't say it was Eastbourne in the book, in the TV series, but it was clearly Eastbourne. And the house they lived in was literally almost exactly where Dee lives in the book. So I was very angry with them about that.
It's like, ruined it for me. So Kat says, I love detective books and often lead onto other authors' other books from them. Yes, so do I, Kat.
And actually, that's how I find my new writers, Kat, is I obsessively just keep going. Read one book, and then often less now because I know the world of crime fiction so well. But when I started out reading crime fiction, often I would look at the author quotes in a book, and if I didn't know who that author was, I'd go on and I'd look up them and stuff, and that's how I'd explore. And I'm glad you like detective books, Kat. So do I. Love them.
So I'm just having a quick look at the time. If you've got any more questions, please do put them in the chat, and I will ask them. I think for the last 10 minutes, let's talk about your new book, which is Dark Road Home.
Yes,
and
okay,
that's
lovely.
what we're gonna get into the catalogue soon. Can you tell us a bit about what that is about and who's in it? And
so Dark Road Home is my 10th novel. It's the first book I've written set in Ireland, which was a really big deal for me. It's also the first, going back to an earlier question, it's the first book I've written from one person's point of view, apart from a prologue and an epilogue, but otherwise it's all told from the viewpoint of one character. The central character is a woman called Leah Ryan. She has returned to Ireland after an absence of nearly 20 years. She goes back to the hometown where she grew up in, and as in all the best crime fiction, she left for a reason, and when she comes back, that reason comes back to haunt her a little bit. And the novel really it's very personal to me because I grew up in a small town in Ireland, but it's really about going back to the conversation we had earlier about secrets. It's about the secrets in a small town, and there's this idea that in a small town everyone knows your business, but actually that's completely not true, because even in a small community, people work even harder to keep their secrets secret. So it's all about the secrets that are hidden in a small community and what happens when they come to light. So that's the book, and I loved writing it.
That sounds like a definite read for me. Is it nice to kind of go back to an area of your childhood? Did you have to do more research because maybe you've been away from there for a while?
Well, the thing is, I've lived out of Ireland for longer than I ever lived in Ireland. So that's why it took me so long, I think, to write a book set in Ireland, because I was so scared of getting it wrong. And also I really love Ireland. So it just took me a long time to find, I think, the story maybe that I wanted to write about Ireland, and but it was lovely. It was lovely because for me, as you've probably picked up on, location is a really central part of a book to me, which is why, Eastbourne, I tried to bring it to life in the Dee books, and why I wrote about Southeast London in my Ellen books. But actually, in this book, even though I hope the Irish setting is very authentic, for the first time ever, I set it in a fictional town. And the reason for that is that I knew if I set it in a real town in Ireland, I'd be getting emails from people saying, "Oh, you got this street wrong, and when you turn left here, that's not where so it's easier just to set it in a fictional town. But apart from the name of the town, even the town itself is actually based in a real place, but people don't need to know that. It's based on a combination of two towns. So that was lovely. It was very difficult, though. It took a long time. And the book I'm writing at the moment, that's set in Manchester. And that's because that's where my son is at university. So I know Manchester and I love it. So it's quite fun to set a book there.
What do your children think about your writing? Do they read your books, or?
Well, the gorgeous thing about this, and this is not uncommon. My family, they love that I'm writing books. They love that it makes me happy, and they're very proud of me. They have zero interest in reading anything I've written. My husband's not read any of my books. My son read Black Valley Farm, my last book, which he did really like. But he hasn't read any of my other books, and my daughter hasn't read any of them, no. And I think that's fine, because it's not like my husband's a lawyer, but I don't ask him about. Actually, he's a criminal defense lawyer, so you'd think he would be of use to me, but he's not. He's of use in other ways, but not in terms of my writing. So he.
You think he'd be a good source of information and research.
What he does do sometimes. So I write upstairs, and if he's downstairs, I'll shout down the stairs and I'll say, "If a body was found in this location, what would happen if?" And he kind of gives me the legal perspective on that. So that's quite useful.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, because you do want to get it right when you're.
Yeah, and the other thing is, obviously, any scenes in my books where there's an interview in a police station, I can get him to check that the police would say this, because in crime fiction, that people, not writers, but more in TV, they get that wrong a lot. So you're very restricted in a police interview situation in what you can say and when you can say it and all that stuff as a police detective.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can have artistic license, can't you? But there's certain situations where it has to be correct.
Yeah. And I think writers are much more cautious of that. I think with TV, they just take more license because they're able to, and people don't care when they're watching a TV series. And I guess because it's not written down, but oh my God, yeah, writers do have to get it right. And we will get lots of angry emails from readers if we don't, which is fine because, we should get it right.
It's true. I think I've just got one final question looking at the time. Do you like interacting with your fans and with the books? Do you like hearing their opinions?
Yes, I absolutely love it. Love it. I could do events like this all day. I could, I know there's this cliche that writers are introverts who sit in a little room and don't like interacting with anyone. In my experience, that's not true for most writers. I think we love meeting readers. Crime writers in particular seem to be extroverts. We love meeting people. We love talking to readers. So I would say to anyone here who's listening to lots of audiobooks, and if you listen to a writer you like, get in touch with them and tell them you like their book. Nothing is better. Honestly, nothing is better for a writer than hearing that. If you really hate a book, maybe
maybe don't mention it.
People really love getting feedback from readers and hearing from readers. And also, I never mind if I'm at an event and somebody says, "Oh, I didn't like this character, I didn't like this book," because that's fine. That's your prerogative as a reader, completely.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to
brilliant. It was really good. I loved I Could Be You. Please do borrow it if you're a Listening Books member. It's a really interesting, clever read. Very exciting. If you need access to audiobooks because you have an illness, disability, learning difficulty, or mental health condition, do consider joining Listening Books, and you can access I Could Be You and thousands of other titles. Hopefully we'll be getting Dark Road Home soon in the catalogue as well, because I'm quite looking forward to that too. And thank you very much for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon. when it gets
Thank
there.
you
We're nearly at 12. And thank you, Sheila, for joining us. It's been really, really
My
interesting.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Bye bye, everyone.